Howdy, class. So I didn't really have the opportunity to introduce myself in class today, so I wanted to take a brief moment and do that here. So, like I mentioned in class, I grew up in a pretty remote area of the United States on the coast of Maine in a little fishing village. And coming from a place like that, I really didn't think that college was for people like me. So I initially tried my hand at manual labor, both as a janitor and as a landscaper, which is a rookie landscaper man, and a lawnmower. And try as hard as I did at those professions, I just wasn't good at it, and I was let go from both of them. I didn't mow the straightest lines, and I had a propensity for missing a spot on the floor here and there, even though I was honestly trying as hard as I could. I just wasn't good at it. And so at that point, kind of feeling like I was down and out on my luck, I decided, well, maybe I should try college after all. And so I applied to my local state school because it was right in my backyard, the satellite campus anyway, University of Maine, Augusta. So it has an acceptance rate at the time that I applied of 99.7%. It's still really high, so it's 97% now. There's a little bit more people that want to go to college now that did back then. So it dipped a teeny bit, but it's still marked as a less selective institution. And that's an understatement to say the least. I mean, you can almost look at these numbers and say, hey, if you're breathing right, you can get in. But that's obviously not true. It's less than 100%. And I'm living proof of the fact that that's not true because I was one of those very few individuals that was rejected from the baccalaureate programs. So I wasn't able to gain entry into a baccalaureate program. But they can't really stop you from taking classes at a state school as a non-degree seeking student as long as you're not a criminal or something like that. So like gaining entry as a non-degree seeking student is pretty much 100% as long as you're not have a criminal background. And you can take empty seats that other degree seeking students haven't taken. And University of Maine at Augusta, the classes didn't usually fill up. And so there was an empty seat that I could take and just kind of give it a hack. And so that's what I did. I started with 2 classes because I figured, 50-50, I'm just going to flunk out of this. I mean, college isn't for people like me. And so I showed up not knowing what was going to happen to me. And I really kind of found myself there. I mean, I just loved learning. I loved the material. And I just couldn't get enough of it and kept going back for more. And so here's the place that I attended most of my classes. So it was a little community college satellite center in Thomaston, Maine. It's a public library now. The public library used to be only a piece of it. So right about there was a public library, and the rest of it was, a community center. And it was used in part for classroom space. There's about 3 classrooms in there, I want to say. And, it's really small, right? There's 50 parking spaces or so, and 3 little classrooms. Classes had about 10 to 20 people in them. And this is what I could afford and what was kind of nearby where I lived. And so what I gave it a shot. And like I said, I really just found myself falling in love with it and wanting to learn more and learn more and learn more. And so I kept taking classes. I found myself doing way better than I thought I would. I was able to gain entry as a degree seeking student once you had good grades, because if you had good grades, it's like, hey, look, I'm doing fine in your classes. Can you let me keep trying? I said, sure. So they let me be a degree seeking student. And I finished all the requirements for a degree, graduated with a baccalaureate degree. And so now I'm again kind of deciding, well, what am I going to do with my life? And so labor force didn't work out very well for me. Academia, education's been working out great so far. It's about the only thing that's been working out great. So I should definitely stick with that, right? That makes sense. So I applied to a bunch of PhD programs, and they all rejected me. Coming from a teeny little, most of my classes at a community college, certainly wasn't a draw for PhD programs. And so, overcoming the little sting of that, so okay, well, now what do I do? Let's try a master's program. So I applied to a whole bunch of master's programs, got a whole bunch more rejections. But one of the very few programs that was willing to take a shot on me was Villanova University. And that's actually a really good master's program. Turns out the main reason why they accepted me was because all the people that they actually wanted to attend, a lot of them declined the offer. And so they had a lot of empty seats they were willing to fill. And it was kind of late in the application cycle. So like, hey, let's give this joker a chance, right? And so I took everything I had and put it in my old car and drove up to Villanova, which is right outside of Philly. So here's where I kind of grew up in Maine on the mid coastline. Philadelphia is right about there, and Villanova is, a few miles outside of Philly. So, my car didn't have 250,000 miles at the time I drove up there, but it was getting there. And it ultimately eclipsed that. A quarter mil, I like to say, it sounds a lot bigger. It's pretty old. I mean, that car barely made it, and the tires actually blew, maybe a month or so after, because they were so old, they wore through completely. And Villanova was both a tremendous time in my life of learning and discovery. It was also a pretty hard time, because I could barely afford to keep my head above the water. I mean, I would go to the grocery store at the end of the day. I'm taking classes and then work in the lab. About 9 o'clock, I learned, is when the deli puts out all the stuff that's about to expire that they want to ditch. And you can go get it, and for super cheap, and that would be my dinner. And if they didn't put anything out that day, then I would skip dinner that day. And so it was, it wasn't easy. So when you think of Villanova, you probably think of the basketball team, right? So here's the greatest collegiate basketball shot of all time for the championship. The Leitner shot wasn't, so this one automatically wins in my book, not just because it's Villanova. So you might think of the basketball team when you think of Villanova, but for me, it was the academics. It's where I discovered that research was something you could do for a living. And man, like I was pretty good at it. So I said, okay, like I've actually found something I can do with my life. That's great. So it's a 2-year program. So after the first year, they have summers off. So I drove back to Maine. And now, after the first year, like I'm out of money. I mean, I come back and I'm like, wow, that was dumb. Like I was hoping that money thing would work itself out, but it didn't. And, looking back at it in retrospect, I realized like, hey, you could have just gotten a student loan. But I mean, I didn't know that at the time. That you couldn't basically get rejected from those. I thought, well, what kind of stupid bank would ever give me a loan? I'm worth like $2,000 at most. And so I thought it was a non-starter. So I come back kind of feeling, empowered by all that I've been learning, but kind of defeated because, well, that's over. It was half of a program. That was dumb. And Villanova called me up, and they were actually so impressed with what I was able to do for them in the lab that they wanted to not only give me a scholarship for the second year, but actually pay me a stipend to work in the lab for more hours. And they didn't know my financial situation, but I desperately needed that to be able to finish, and it made all the difference. So I go back and I'm able to spend a lot of time in the lab, because now they're paying me even more time to spend in the lab. And I really discover that I'm pretty good at research. And we were able to make discoveries there that wound up being published in academic journals and pave the way for me to be a PhD student. And so at that point, I actually have a competitive, research background now. I'm able to gain entry into the PhD program at Johns Hopkins University, which is in Baltimore. So it's pretty close. It was maybe a 2-3 hour drive at most from Philly. And so move over to Johns Hopkins and do the 5-year program there. But Johns Hopkins isn't known for basketball. It's known for lacrosse. And if you grow up in Maine, I mean, I could never get into lacrosse. Maine's hockey world, and lacrosse just kind of looks and feels to a Mainer like fake hockey. I mean, where's the ice skates? Where's the ice? It doesn't compute. So I never got into the sports scene there. And it was at Johns Hopkins that I really kind of came into my own as a scientist. And in the first year in the program, I kind of came up with this idea for a research project that honestly changed my life. I mean, this one idea led to a research project that published some papers that really changed the way a lot of people think about attention. And that opened up doors for me. That opened up doors that snowballed into actually building a research career, gaining some measure of notoriety in the research world, and ultimately making me competitive for something like a research-oriented professor position. And so that's what I came to do here at Texas A&M. So Texas A&M was first place to offer me a professor job, and they were looking to bring on some brain imagers. And so they were looking, actually they hired 5 people in my year. They're making a pretty aggressive push to get some upstart in brain imaging. And it was a really competitive offer, and my wife and I looked at it and happily took it. And I haven't regretted it ever since. It's been a tremendous opportunity. I have a great lab team. I have a lot of great resources, and you can do a lot of really good work here. And so, why share that kind of story? So, I could have just mentioned that I attended a University of Maine school and started telling you the story from Villanova and just focus on the accomplishments and the positives and not tell you about some of those kind of failures and hardships and setbacks along the way. And the reason that I want to do that is because my suspicion is most of you, if not literally all of you, have found yourself in some kind of analogous place in your life where you feel that the world is just telling you that it's something that you feel you really want to do, that you want to try. Well, that's just not for people like you. You know, and for whatever reason that may be, you grew up on the wrong side of the train tracks. You're too poor. You don't have the right family. You don't have the right parents. You don't have enough talent. You don't have enough ability. Your grades aren't high enough. Whatever that is, I just want to tell you, like, don't believe those lies. It doesn't mean that it's going to work out in the end, right? There's so many paths that my academic journey took that could have been easily derailed. And if it was derailed, like I wouldn't have batted an eyelash at it. I mean, sure, it didn't work out. It's not particularly surprising, right? But man, it was worth the effort just to try. And when you feel like you have nothing to lose, that can be a really powerful place to be in, because if you're not afraid of somebody thinking you're stupid, because they probably think you're stupid anyway, then just go for it. Give it a go. And if there's another thing that I think that journey, I hope, tells you, is that sometimes it just takes this one moment that can serve as a pivot point in your life where your circumstances can change dramatically. And that doesn't mean that that change happens overnight, but that change starts a process that snowballs into an opportunity that you thought somebody like yourself would never be able to have. And that's what happened in my situation, working in the lab in Villanova and then having that idea at Johns Hopkins that really transformed my career. So if you're sitting there and you're thinking, oh, I was really thinking about this, but my GPA is too low, or there's something else in your record or your background that you think is serving as a barrier. I mean, I'm not saying those kind of things aren't barriers. I mean, sure, they're barriers, but it's not something that necessarily is impossible to overcome. It just means that you have to find that one opportunity where you can really plug into something and kind of showcase what you're actually capable of and make a tremendous change. And so I just kind of want to encourage you in that. If you're feeling like, something that you really want to pursue and feel passionate about isn't for somebody like you because of all those kind of lies that the world's going to tell you, I just want to encourage you not to buy into that, and just, it's worth giving it a shot. It doesn't mean it's going to work out, but as long as you can enjoy that process of just trying, seeing what's going to happen, I just want to encourage you in that. And if you feel yourself kind of weighted down by those lies, don't be afraid to reach out. I've mentored a lot of people through those kind of places because I've been there myself. And so before you just kind of give up and say, well, I'm not going to be able to ever achieve something like that, I just encourage you to talk to me first. And I'm happy to kind of help you think about some of the ways that you can kind of look into maybe an alternative path to possibly making that work out. Again, a lot of times it doesn't necessarily work out, but it's worth trying, and I hope you do. I hope you enjoy the semester, and I'll see you on Friday.